Hey guys, so Konami dropped the ban list for the December 2023 format moving into 2024, and well, I want to give my thoughts on it a little bit, and yeah. So I've got these tiers laid out here. We've got tier 1 slash meta, which are decks that are probably going to be competing the best at a competitive level, and then we have possibly meta, which are decks that I think have the potential to be tier 1 and compete in the tier 1 category, but I'm not entirely sure. Then there's tier 2 and rogue, which is just like everything that's not tier 1, everything that's not going to be like a top contender, but is still able to compete. And then we have Dogwater. This is the table 500 tier. Not actually, this is just like decks that are probably not going to be competing at the degree of like the tier 1 and the tier 2 decks. Um oh, and then there's Moki Moki tier. That should be self-explanatory. So we're just gonna move the Moki Moki up there. Moki Moki tier is reserved for like obviously Moki Moki, but also any deck on this list that is just going to be so unplayable that you might as well just be better off trying to make Moki Moki. So number one, first tier, we've got Spellbook. Uh, Personally, I don't think that it was Judgment that came off the list, right? I don't think Judgment coming off the list is really gonna do anything. Deck is kind of ass. It's lived past its prime. I think that the deck is probably going to need some support, or they're going to have to create a deck that's really going to abuse the new spellbooks, or the spellbook stuff coming off the list. So I'm just gonna drop it here. Like it just does not matter very much. Um, we got Trap Tricks. This is my main deck. And then my secondary is Labyrinth, but Trap Tricks with the hits to rescue Ace, which was uh I can't remember the card's name. The one that sets 4 back row. I think that hit to rescue Ace is like kind of whatever. They're getting new stuff out relatively soon, I think in February. And Konami pretty much just had to do like a preemptive hit to prevent the deck from kind of spiraling out of control with the new stuff that they'd be getting. Uh Anyway, Trap Tricks I think is a good rogue strategy going into the format. I think there's going to be a lot of graveyard strategies moving in or moving forward, and Trap Tricks is not only able to deal with those graveyard strategies with cards like Gravedigger, as well as Dimension Shifter, but they also have a pretty good, like a pretty decent uh, Vanquish Soul matchup. They have a decent Lab matchup, though it is kind of die roll dependent. Um, they go pretty well into a lot of decks this format because of the ability to run pretty much any board breaker, any hand trap. They can main deck Fenrir, they can main deck Droll, they can main deck Ash Imperm evenly. Lance, they don't main deck Lancia, but they can side deck Lancia. They can just their deck is so malleable. I think that they bring a lot of value to the table as far as a rogue strategy. Next up is Tyrolment. Though they did lose Kelbeck and the other stupid one, I think that Tyr is probably still going to be a rogue contender because they got Harp back for Orcus, and I think that what they're going to be doing is they're going to be using the new Lightsworn support as well as the Orcus stuff in tandem with the Horus cards. To kind of fill that gap. So I think that Tyrolman is going to be fine as a rogue strategy. Next, Labyrinth. I think that Labyrinth is probably one of the bigger winners off of this list. I would put them at tier 1 slash meta, or maybe possibly meta. I think possibly meta is the big call because Labyrinth tends to have this issue of performing really well at the beginning of formats and then people learn how to play against the strategy, and then it starts to fall off. It happens every single format that they come up, and then people change the list and they take it to a new event, and then it does well. So then people start adapting that new list, and then people learn how to play against that new list, and then it just falls off again. The Labyrinth is really malleable, and though they didn't receive any hits, I think that people are going to give it very high representation, but it's going to start falling off because of decks like Fire King, and I think that the tier Orcus stuff is going to have a relatively decent matchup against it. Um, yeah, it's just I think that people are going to hype it up a lot, and it's just going to do as well as it's always done, and then just start falling off because people are learning how to play against it. Sky Striker, they got what's it called? The draw one spell. This deck is ass. Just calling it right now. Like, they're gonna main deck 3 Upstart Goblin, and they're just gonna lose to Droll in main phase. So that's gonna be fun. I've got Transaction Rollback here because Rollback itself is a deck in the OCG, and combo decks can abuse it very well. I think that Rollback is going to have more of an impact in combo and as a standalone deck than it will in lab. And this might be a hot take, but in lab, typically Rollback isn't really going to copy anything meaningful. I mean, of course, you have Debarrier and Eradicator, but usually by the time you use those, you've already gotten your value off those cards. And some people are saying, like, oh, you can run Harpy's Featherstorm, or you can run some other trap that is coming out relatively soon. You can also copy Dharma's Cannon's effect off of it, but you have to open Rollback, a furniture, and a way to get that trap engrave, which combo decks, they just make Beatrice and they go dump Erad, dump this, and then they copy Erad, and that's also how the deck itself functions, the Rollback deck. But in lab, it's a little more difficult. Typically, if you have access to something like Erad, you're just going to set it and use it anyway. You're not gonna try to dump it into graveyard, and though while you can, it's kind of just a like, it just feels win more. It really just feels win more. And then people that are coping and saying like, oh, you should run Featherstorm in lab to copy off of this, it's like, bro. Okay, so you open Featherstorm, but you don't open Rollback. What now? Or you open Rollback without a discard. What now? Like, congratulations. It's fucking dead. Congrats. But I will put Rollback in possibly meta, just because there is potential for it for combo decks and as a standalone deck. But the lab variant, I think, is going to be the weaker version. Up next is Orcust. I think that it's going to be a tier 2 / rogue strategy. I could see tier and Orcust being bumped up to possibly meta, depending on how the variants go, because they have a lot to work with right now. They have the PK variants, they have the Horus variants, theoretically you can do like the runic variants. There's a lot of variants to work with, and all of those variants I feel like have good and bad matchups against different things, and do things better and some things worse than the other variants. So it's just kind of like we'll have to wait and see. But I'm putting it in Rogue because I think comfortably both of these decks, both Tier and Orcust, lose to a lot of the same stuff, and people are going to prepare for them. And once you've prepared for them, it's kind of just like GG easy, like opening D-Shifter, for example. So, yeah. Volcanic, me personally, I think this deck is fucking dog water. I think this deck is terrible, but realistically, it's like a good rogue option. Most of the people I see topping with it, or well, not really like topping, quote unquote, but people that are having success with the deck, I'm not even lying, most of it I think is just them burning people in time. And that's honestly, I think that's just it. Like they're just burning people in time. Fire King, I think it's gonna be tier 1. Uh, I think that's gonna be like one of the bigger decks moving into the format. D-Link, I think it's dog water, but that's just because every time I play against D-Link, all their boards are just so easy to out. But I think that they're reasonably rogue slash tier 2. Sword Soul, rogue slash tier 2. This deck has not changed at all, and with 3 desires, it's like they have more consistent draw power, but I don't think it's going to propel them into any sort of insane category like, oh, tier 1 or anything. Branded, I think, came off this list pretty well. I think that the possibility is there for them to be a top meta contender because they still have the puppet lock and also the chimera stuff. Um, but at the same time, they do lose to a single Ash, hand depending. So you could safely put them in Rogue. I think I would probably put them in Rogue for now. Vanquish Soul, I think this deck is literally a single card away from being tier 1. Right now, I think it's a good Rogue contender, though. A lot of the success that people are having with it, it literally just seems like it's one card away. Like it's just one card away. Rika, Plant, Pile, Arrow Mage, whatever the hell you want to call it. I think this deck is perfectly fine. Rika slash Arrow Mage slash Plant Pile, whatever you want to call it. I think this deck is perfectly fine. I think it's still a good rogue contender. The only thing that the Banlist actually did to the Dryas combo was now you run Arrow Mage Laurel, and your combo is going to be you make Jasmine and you keep the Loci and the Twin Seed on the field. You tribute the Loci with Jasmine, summon Laurel, and then you make a second Jasmine. So then on a new chain, you'll gain 800, and you'll go Chainlink 1 Jasmine, Chainlink 2 the second Jasmine to search 2 plants. And you just do the combo that way. It does hurt the grind game, and there were specific times that you would make Dryas and they would Asher Imperm the Dryas, and you would be able to extend to make another Dryas and attempt to do the effect again. But I think that those times were few and far in between, because the only people that were trying to stop Dryas with an Ash were probably people who didn't really know the matchup very well. Because typically you want to hit Jasmine, or you want to Ash the Sunvine Sowing. So yeah, I think it's still a good rogue contender. Plus they're getting support in Phantom Nightmare with the Arrow Mage stuff, and that is gonna be insane. So it's still good. Unchained. The Shavara hit is pretty tough. The deck is gonna have a very hard time grinding now. And I think that it's going to be tough for them to find a way to replace those 2 spots. The tour guide line it's not dead, but it's pretty bad now. Personally, I think that Unchained should just pivot to the Life Twin stuff, because the Life Twin stuff gives you an upwards of 3 draws. 1 draw on your turn and 2 draws on your opponent's turn. Allows you to play through Nib better, and gives you an additional interaction in the form of Trouble Sunny. Because if you remember, the Unchained Link 2 that searches a monster, it banishes itself from grave to summon a fiend from grave. All the Life Twin extra deck monsters are fiends. And plus the Life Twin combo can also help you in time. It's just a very good engine that I think should just replace the tour guide stuff. So I would put it in possibly meta, but it's kind of a to be determined kind of thing at the moment. Cashier, I think Cashier is dog shit. without a Rise Heart, this deck relies solely on making their only surviving rank 7, which does absolutely nothing. You can't even 5-zone lock them anymore. And if you can, it's entirely dependent on your opponent for the most part, which is not very good. And then the people that are pivoting into the kind of like control slash trap slash stun variants is just, I think it's copium. So I think that it's not very good. It's not going to see a whole lot of success. Sprite, I think Sprite came off pretty well. I would put them in possibly meta, but without Elf. Without Elf, I think that Sprite struggles to do anything post turn, their turn 1 if their board has been broken. So I would put them in Rogue, but I also kind of want to say Dog Water because most this like Sprite is just incredibly easy to out. Literally, like a single Fenrir, special summoning a single Fenrir can just out their whole board. Well, theoretically, quote unquote, because I mean, obviously they can have like smashers or something to deal with it, but it's like their boards are not, they do not stick very well compared to something like Sword Soul. Sword Soul seems to stick a little better because it can get stuff for the next turn. But I'm gonna give them the benefit of the doubt since they just got starter back to 3, I believe. Mikanko is like okay. They can't go first anymore without Isolde. So I think that's going to be really tough for them, and their only real option is they're going second stuff. So I think that they can still top. And I want to think that they can still make at least a Baron. I want to think they can still at least make a going first board, so I'm going to put them in tier 2. I'm going to be a little generous with them. Infernoble, though, this deck is fucking cooked. It's gone. Without Isolde, the deck just loses extremely hard to Droll, Ash, Imperm. The deck is not very good anymore. Isolde really did do a whole lot for the deck and propelled it to meta status. And without Isolde, it's just really tough. Pearly, I think Pearly is going to continue to be tier 1 slash meta. I think that it's a really good deck, and semi-limiting the there's, I can't remember the quick play spell name. There's a ton of them, but semi-limiting one of their cards, it's like, oh, instead of going like draw 9, they draw 4. And it just lowers the consistency very slightly. So I think that they're fine. They just got a slap on the wrist, honestly. Blue, I think blue is still pretty good. I would say it's possibly meta. I would say it's possibly meta. It's kind of tough to say. Blue loses very easily to just like randomly a lone Ash. But sometimes they can also just play through like 3 negates. So I'm going to keep it in possibly meta. Just because of the potential moving forward. Like, if any of these tier 2 slash rogue strategies right here end up being very good, like, for example, D-Link, or let's say, like, Plant Pile, if they end up getting propelled to tier 1 slash meta status, I think Flu is going to do a lot better against those decks. Against Fire King and Pearly, it's kind of like 50-50, I think. And then against the Lab, they just get cooked by Lab. Vanadium, I think that Vanadium came out insanely strong off of this. I think that it dealt with some of the issues Vanadium was facing in the meta by kind of lowering the ceiling. Or not really the ceiling, but lowering the consistency for a lot of decks, which is by extension a buff to Vanadium. So I think that Vanadium is going to see more play and it's going to see more success. Centurion is like Calamity didn't get banned, so it's, I mean, they might get new support later down the line, so it's like possibly going to do something. Mathmech, circular decks, dog water. It's Mathmech is gone. It's donezo. Deck is dead. Rescue Ace, I think, is still tier 1. Because even though they limited the card that sets for back row, they're getting new support soon in Phantom Nightmare, I'm pretty sure. And the deck it's gonna be fine. I mean, to be honest, you really only need the one. So it's like, who the fuck cares? And you have recycling capabilities anyway. Runic, Bestial, Runic Dex, Runic Horus, fucking whatever. I think they're gonna be tier 1 / meta. Runic saw like 0 hits. So I think that it's going to be perfectly fine. It's gonna see a lot more success. Exosister. I think Exosister came off pretty well from this list. No hits. They still have D-Shifter. I think that with how the meta is currently shaping up, they have a really good matchup against Fire King and Vanadium with D-Shifter. And against Rescue Ace, I could see it being kind of tough. Runic is pretty tough. Pearly, D-Shifter against Pearly is really good as well. So I think that Exosister has 3 favorable matchups, and then 2 non-favorable at the moment with the current tier list. Dinomorphia came off pretty well. I think that Dinomorphia is a really solid deck, but they don't really have a hard time going second. But playing around Rexsturm is not exactly hard, especially when you're at 50 life points and all your opponent needs to do is get a body on board. Or like 2 bodies on board. Like if you, unless you intact, I guess, but literally all they need to do is get the traps out of your graveyard, don't run into intact, and then just hit over a small monster. Or just Imperm Rexsturm and then make over a 3k body. It's like, there, obviously it's not as simple and easy as that, but the deck is very good, but it has its flaws, and I think those flaws are just too easily exploitable. So yeah, that's the tier list. I'm going to be uploading a Rika profile relatively soon, just to showcase some stuff you can do with the deck. Even though Dryas and Healer are now at 1, I think the deck is still very good. I like, genuinely, I think that Dryas to 1 and Healer to 1 are nothing burger hits. The only thing that those hits did to plants is that it makes it harder to continue extending if they hit the Dryas with specific hands. So I think that moving forward, you just run things like cross out, followed by triple tack, thrust, just stuff like that to help you play through hand traps a little better. And well, yeah, that's my thoughts on upcoming format and where I think all the decks lie at the moment. I want to thank you guys for watching, and subscribe if you haven't already. You can catch me streaming Thursdays through Sundays on Twitch at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We do the podcast on Thursdays, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And yeah, let me know what your thoughts are on this list and what your hopes are for the upcoming format. And I'll see you guys later. Thanks again.